You know, the very structure of the border provisions, however, makes this impossible to achieve. You know, the Wall Street Journal said the other day and suggested that this bill really could start a trade war, and if we begin to try to impose our bureaucracy on other countries, we could just have that. Then we get to page 225. Distribution of emission allowance rebates. And further down the page it says, shall be pursuant to the entity's indirect carbon factor as calculated under subsection B3. Can anybody tell me how to calculate an indirect carbon factor or what an indirect carbon factor is? Then we get to page 226. Not more than 85% of the United States imports for that sector are produced or manufactured in countries that have met at least one of the criteria in that section. Then the 10-year reduction schedule set forth in the subsection shall begin in the next vintage year. So now we're going to try to control imports from countries based on what they're doing with regard to their energy policy. Use of data to determine factor, page 231. Where it is not possible to determine the precise electricity emissions intensity factor for an entity using the methodology in Clause 1. In what instances would it not be possible to determine what that is? Let me get to page 233. In each eligible industrial sector every 4 years, using an average of the 4 most recent years of the best available data, for the purposes of the list required to be published no later than February 1, 2013, the administrator shall use the best available data for the maximum number of years, up to 4 years, for which data are available. Why every 4 years? What's this data used for? Then it goes on, the administrator shall limit the average direct greenhouse gas emissions per unit of output calculated under paragraph 4 for any eligible industrial sector to an amount that is not greater than it was in any previous calculation under this section. So what's the cost of this provision? Or on page 234, the administrator shall use data from the greenhouse gas registry established under section 713. Well, how much is this going to cost? Promoting international reductions in industrial emissions, page 236. Congress finds that for the purposes of this subpart, as set forth in section 761C, can be most effectively addressed and achieved through agreements negotiated between the United States and foreign countries. It is the policy of the United States to work proactively under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and other appropriate fora to establish binding agreements, including sectoral agreements, committing all major greenhouse gas emitting nations to contribute equitably to the reduction of global greenhouse emissions. The bottom line of all of this is all pain for the United States citizens and no gain. Then we get to page 237. The President shall provide a notification on climate change described in paragraph 2 to each foreign country, the products of which are not exempted under section 768. This is less than a fig leaf here. They're trying to pretend that this notification will satisfy the consultation required by the WTO rules. It won't end there, and it's going to result in retaliation against United States exports. Let me get further down that page, requesting the foreign country to take appropriate measures to limit the greenhouse gas emissions in those countries. So if they're really nice, they won't have to, but if we can force them to adopt our bizarre regulatory scheme. Then we get to page 238. The United States negotiating objectives with regard to multilateral environmental negotiations. So here we are telling the administration what their objectives are going to be as they negotiate environmental issues with other countries around the world. Presidential reports, page 239. Not later than January 1st, 2017, and every 2 years thereafter, the President shall submit a report to Congress on the effectiveness of the distribution of emission allowances under rebates, Part 1, in mitigating carbon leakage in eligible industrial sectors. Let me go to page 260. Let's go to page 260. Modification of earned income credit amount for individuals with non-qualifying children. Why does this bill neglect middle-class families in America? Why is it that we're only going to help some people who will qualify for the earned income credit for individuals with no qualifying children? Further down here it says, the Secretary determines experienced a reduction in purchasing power as a result of the provisions of this act. It's a flat-out admission that every American is going to pay more for all of their energy. And it goes on and on and on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, does this give you some idea of why the American people think their Congress is out of touch? The idea that the federal government can create this giant bureaucracy to try to control how much CO2 gets into the atmosphere. We know that if we were to do our all-of-the-above energy strategy, we'd see renewable sources of energy on the scene, available, producing jobs more quickly than under the underlying bill. We know that under our bill, you can actually have nuclear energy plants being built, cleaning up the air at a much faster rate than the underlying bill. But there's really a big underlying difference between our approach and the approach of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And that is trusting the American people. You give the American people, if we give the American people the right incentives, they'll make the right decisions. But that's not what we have on the floor today. What we have on the floor today is typical big government. And the fight that we have between the two sides of the aisle really boils down to one word. It boils down to freedom. The freedom to allow the American people to live their lives without all of these extra taxes and all of this bureaucracy. And I would just say to my colleagues, I did my best to try to get through the 300-page amendment that was filed at 3:09 in the morning. Obviously, somebody knew this was coming, but it wasn't filed until 3:09 this morning. This is not the way we should be doing legislation. The American people expect more of us, and you know what? They deserve a lot more from us. So I would say to my colleagues, let's not go down this path of increasing taxes on every single American. Let's not go down the path of moving millions of jobs to China, India, and other countries around the world. Let's trust the American people. Let's give them our all-of-the-above Energy Act and allow America to flourish, to allow jobs to flourish, and most importantly, to allow freedom to flourish. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, the gentleman point of order. There's no order in the House.
In order, the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, the gentleman the minority leader was yielded 2.5 minutes. Could you tell us how much time he consumed?
The gentleman used the customary amount of time yielded to the minority leader.
Well, Madam Speaker, the 2.5 minutes was extended to over an hour. And this is from the same party that had a 15-minute roll call extended into 3 hours while they tried to twist the arms of their own people. Madam Speaker, I would like order in the House.